Okay, thank you. We're gonna have to end the workshop. We have to end the workshop in about a minute. We'll begin the regular planning commission meeting. Okay? The regular meeting for the planning commission, Spanish Fort, is now in session. Roll call.
Gant, Davis,
Here.
Diamond, Vaughn,
Here.
Lindsay, Smith,
Here.
Nelson, Tucker,
Here.
McMillan.
Mr. Connor, would you lead us in the pledge, in the invocation and pledge allegiance?
Father, we thank you for everything that you give us, and we thank you for the blessings that you bestow upon us and the grace that you show us. And we thank you for the privilege and opportunity of living in this community. And I thank you for each person that's here tonight that's volunteering their time to serve this community and make decisions in this way. Father, I ask that you give them wisdom. Your word says if any man lacks wisdom or needs wisdom, that if they ask it, it's freely given. And Father, I ask that you give them wisdom to make the decisions that are right for this community and will bring glory and honor to you. And Father, in this time, we say prayers each time thanking people for their service to our community as responders, as military personnel that protects our freedom. And in the last week, if we haven't seen enough in this country to ask for your protection, we're foolish. So Father, we ask that you protect us, keep us safe, give the people that make decisions for the protection of our security wisdom. And Father, we thank you for those people that protect the very freedoms that we exercise and oftentimes take for granted each day. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any committee reports? At this time, we have the approval of the minutes from December 27, January 10th, work session and regular session. Has anyone had a chance to read them? Are there any corrections? Then it stands approved as written. Getting into the old business, agenda item 22-1103, application for preliminary plat. Casey, can you bring us up to speed on that?
Mr. Chairman, this is the preliminary subdivision plat application for Northwood Subdivision Phase 1. This applicant's requesting approval for Phase 1 of Northwood Subdivision located to the east of U.S. Highway 225 and north of Stillwater Subdivision outside the corporate limits of the city of Spanish Fort. The subdivision plan as submitted for Phase 1 proposes to subdivide 43.21 acres located to the north of Stillwater Subdivision and to the south of the Lake Subdivision into 57 lots, averaging approximately 12,000 square feet per lot. The applicant is proposing to construct 3,562 linear feet of roadway with a right-of-way of 60 feet in this phase. The proposed phase would connect to Stillwater Subdivision via Aberdeen Way. The existing conditions within the vicinity of the subject property are typically low to medium density single-family residential uses similar to the proposed development. A traffic study has been provided with the initial application for master plan approval and has been reviewed by city staff. Traffic improvements as recommended in the study include north and southbound turn lane on State Route 225 at the subdivision entrance, and also an additional southbound right turn lane on State Route 225 at US 31 with signal phasing and timing at full build-out. A northbound right turn lane on State Route 225 at the subdivision entrance is recommended by the study after completion of 42 of the 57 single-family homes in Phase 1. And as we discussed during the work session, this study is planned to be revised based on the existing master plan that's been approved by the city. The applicant has submitted a letter of request in order to request a waiver from the Spanish Fort subdivision regulations requiring a maximum roadway grade of 7% and request that they be allowed to follow the Baldwin County subdivision regulations on this matter, which would allow a maximum grade of 15%. Applicant has provided verification of service availability from all applicable utility providers. The staff has reviewed the most recent revisions submitted for this application as well as the accompanying reports and is satisfied that all comments have been addressed with all necessary due diligence being complete and that the proposed subdivision plan is in compliance with all applicable ordinances and regulations. Therefore, pending further comments from the Planning Commission regarding the requested waiver to road grade requirements, staff recommends the Planning Commission approve agenda item 231103, preliminary plat application for Northwoods Phase 1.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we will have a public hearing on this agenda item. And if you want to speak, you need to come sign a form over here, and we'll get it. We'll call you up, and you can make your statements. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, to add to staff report for purposes of the discussion at the work session, in the event that someone was to make a determination to make a motion to approve this plat, based on the discussions with the representative of the developer, this should be conditioned upon a note on the plat stating that the dam on the property on the lake would not be maintained by any governmental entity, including but not limited to Baldwin County or the city of Spanish Fort. In addition to this, there was discussion regarding the entrance requirements and ALDOT's requirements for the road access. It's our understanding that they're going to be amending their application or presentation to ALDOT to only include the 160 approximate lots in the master plan as approved that is subject to the 3 phases. One of the reasons that the council was, and the Planning Commission was reluctant to enter any type of any MOU is because the city is presently administering subdivision plat approval over this property pursuant to an agreement between the Baldwin County Commission and the city regarding the exercise of extraterritorial jurisdiction. That agreement is, at this point in time, scheduled to sunset and expire in July of this year, I believe, and there's no agreement at this point in time to extend that. Could happen, don't know, but that jurisdiction will, unless something changes, go back to the county, and we wanted to make sure we didn't get the city in the middle of trying to enforce provisions in the future as it relates to that agreement.
Okay, thank you.
David, real quick, since we got a lot of the public here, just for my education, speak again to the temporary nature of what we're being asked to do as far as our extraterritorial ETJ. Easier to say. If you will, I just want to make sure that the public here kind of really understands.
Yes. I guess it's going on about two and a half years ago now. The legislature passed an act that over time will constrict or reduce police jurisdictions and extraterritorial jurisdictions over time. It does have a provision that allows counties and municipalities to enter into agreements regarding the exercise of that extraterritorial jurisdiction. The way that the agreements, as I understand it today, are drafted with the city, and I believe the other municipalities that have entered into one, is that those agreements will expire, I believe, in July. They were for a term of 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, and they'll expire in July 2023. So unless the counties and the respective municipalities agree to an extension of that time frame or that agreement, then all subdivision jurisdiction and review will go back to the county for them to review. So in this case, one of the reasons that we were concerned about having the city enter into an agreement with AlDOT was we might be entering into an agreement over an area that we might not have jurisdiction of in 4 or 5 months. And so that was one of the reasons that we didn't feel comfortable doing that. To be honest with you, I wouldn't know if I'd feel comfortable doing it if it was in the city limits, but certainly outside where we could lose jurisdiction over that area, that seemed odd that we would put ourselves in that position. Is that fair?
And duly note, this is really the first subdivision that's come to this planning commission outside of the ETJ of this magnitude.
Right. Well, it's the first subdivision in this area. Prior to the passage of this last, we really just administered subdivisions out on 31, around the Eastern Shore Center in those areas. We really didn't go very far north. When the new agreements came out, they wanted us to take in basically our territory areas defined by statute, and so we extended at that time. But again, that will sunset in July unless that's extended by the parties.
On this agenda item, Mr. Chuck Barrick. Okay, the public hearing is now open. When you come to the mic, press the speak button. Name and address.
Sir,
Could you announce your name and address?
my name is Charles Brevik, B-R-E-V-I-K. My address is 35723 Delvan Lane, Bay Minette. I mostly have questions on this particular proposal. This, I believe, is the 4th time that Northwoods has come up for consideration. In each previous issue, it has never been presented, never received comments on it. So some of the information that I have may be a little bit dated, but I still feel it's important to present the questions and talk about this. Like I say, this is round 4. The first question that I have is that I'm not sure who the developer in this particular case is. It's listed as Dilworth Homes, but a press release dated January 8th, 2021 states that Harris Doyle Homes has acquired Dilworth Homes effective January 4th, 2021. So my first confusion on this whole issue is, who are we really dealing with? Did Harris Doyle Homes assume the name Dilworth Homes? Or, you know, I don't understand the status of that particular change. And I think that could very well be significant as we go along. The Spanish Fort Planning and Zoning Commission, you folks right here, in a previous meeting approved the master plan for the development of this subdivision. Does that approval of the master plan have any inhibiting factors that go into approving, for example, phase 1? It's I don't know what your position is going to be since the master plan has been, my understanding, the master plan has been approved. Each of the lots as shown on here is approximately 12,000 square feet. That's roughly a third of an acre. And that's significantly different from the lots in either Stillwater or the lakes. And I'm not sure that's a good idea to put a high-density, small home type development between two little more upscale developments. I also noticed they have a entrance into Stillwater at one point, and I don't know if that is currently existing off of a county road, or if that is something that's completely going to be new. In looking at this presentation that we got on the screen, the utilities up there are listed as North Baldwin Utilities and the electrical by Riviera Electrical. Now, at this point in time, White House Water still has the water distribution in that area. When this first came up back about a year ago, one of the things that came out real quick was the White House Water said that they would be unable to provide sufficient water for fire protection services. So that's one of the things that I feel that this Planning and Zoning Commission needs to resolve is, are we dealing with North Baldwin Utilities for water for this development, or are we dealing with White House Water? It doesn't make any difference to me, but the first submission came back to White House Water, and White House Water said no. They couldn't support it. Riviera Utilities, I'm not sure they serve anybody up in this area. I think we're mostly by Baldwin EMC. I can't stand here and tell you that's the whole truth, but it's written on their proposal for phase one. And I think that needs to be resolved before you take action on voting whether to accept or decline this particular request. I appreciate the time I had to talk with you here. I do oppose this subdivision on a number of factors. Some of it boils down to the initial submission was, from my perspective, extremely poorly done, and like I say, it couldn't be supported from a logistics and infrastructure perspective. I appreciate having the opportunity to voice my opposition.
Okay, thank you. The next, Mr. James Pittman.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commission members, Mayor, Mr. Connor. I'm James Pittman. I'm an attorney in Baldwin County. I reside in Spanish Fort. My office is in Daphne. I've represented Stillwater subdivision for about 15 years. Before you all had the pleasure of inheriting the oversight of these subdivisions, we had a phase that was added by a developer other than the original developer of Stillwater. That's been, I think, about 5 or 6 years ago. And in conjunction with that new developer buying land and doing some preliminary construction activities, land clearing, those kinds of things, there was significant siltation in the third detention pond within Stillwater that would not have occurred but for that denuding of the land. As a result, there were some pretty angry residents. The neighborhood runs a pretty tight budget and didn't have any capital reserves to do that. I can tell you that my client is the association, but it's comprised of owners who are educated individuals They're not here just to oppose it for the sake of opposing it. What they would ask you all to do is to consider imposing some additional requirements and slowing things down with hopes that we could resolve something with the Dilworth entity. Sounds like it may have been acquired by a bigger home contracting company while we work through some of these issues. If everybody here from Stillwater would please stand up. I thank you all. You can remain return to your seats. Some of these people have signed up after my comments. They may or may not want to do that to speak to you all. But I will tell you that they have the same concerns that you always hear about. Increased traffic flow. Stillwater is built out. It's finished. There may be one or two undeveloped lots, but for the most part, they're not worried about construction traffic. Dump trucks, concrete trucks, all of those things. Based on the connectivity that's proposed with this phase, they are very much concerned over that like they were last time. Last time, the Planning Commission of Baldwin County tabled it. We were able to work with the developer at that time, which was Truland Homes. Fortunately, they had the resources to remove the siltation from the pond. There were issues, and we had evidence of damage to common areas and infrastructure that we were able to resolve that matter, and ultimately the neighborhood agreed with that proposed phase that was part of Stillwater. I will tell you all, and you weren't privy to it and weren't a party to it, but there was an agreement that this would not take place, that what was agreed to then was the extent of it. Mr. Connor made a comment in the work session, and I think every time I listen to Mr. Connor, I learn something. He said, and I know he's right, that because he said it, that the city's not responsible for roads and infrastructure and it's ETJ. I would have thought that it is. I will tell you all that there is need of repair and resurfacing in the Stillwater streets as they sit based on their usage of their residents, let alone a phase that could come on and significantly impact traffic through Stillwater. I heard about traffic studies on 225, but we are not aware of any traffic study that has been done within the confines of Stillwater and that would assess the impact that the proposed 57 lots of phase one and ultimately 164 lots would have on that infrastructure and who's going to pay for it. Mr. Connor had the suggestion that you all could put a note on the plat that says the city and the county aren't responsible for the detention ponds. I get it. That's good legal advice. But as a practical matter, I can tell you that of the 70 or 80 neighborhoods I represent in this county, all of which are owner-managed, owner-run, meaning that the owners take over after the developer hands it over. None of them were ever told your detention ponds are going to have ongoing maintenance and you need to have capital reserves to make sure that those resources are managed. Planning staff or perhaps the engineer commented that there have been done some studies on the dam integrity, and it appears that they are functioning with a few minor tweaks or corrections. I will represent to you all that the ponds in Stillwater were only designed and built to handle the capacity of Stillwater runoff, not the North Woods runoff. And what we learned in that last time is that if they have adequate volume to handle that stormwater, they may be fine. But when you start denuding adjacent properties and you have siltation and detention ponds, they lose that capacity, which then puts more stress and strain on the emergency spillways and all of those things. The engineer for the applicant said, in response, I think, to a question from the mayor, hopefully the POA would sign a joint maintenance agreement, whether it be for the dams, the detention ponds, or the infrastructure of the roads. I would submit to you all that Stillwater's already responsible for what they've got. I don't think they're going to be inclined to agree to then be responsible financially for a new development that is adjacent to them, that is impacting their roads and their detention pond structures. It's my understanding, and I apologize I'm skipping around, but I want to cover ground and be sensitive to all of your time. So one thing I would ask you all to consider is tabling this matter until a traffic study could be done regarding the impact on the Stillwater infrastructure. I don't know if there are any representatives or owners here from the lakes. Is anybody here from the lake subdivision? It doesn't look like it, but I know that their detention ponds potentially are impacted looking at the topographical map that's on the screen. One thing that it's my understanding is that the city has adopted the International Fire Codes, and the International Fire Code adopted by the city requires that in developments of 1 or 2 family dwellings where the number of dwelling units exceeds 30 shall be provided with 2 separate and approved fire apparatus access roads. And Mr. Connor can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is the law of the city of Spanish Fort. Said another way, Stillwater's grandfathered, but if the Stillwater developer applied to develop Stillwater today, I don't think it could be given plat approval without at least 2 entrances on Highway 225 or elsewhere. Based on the current law that's on the books now with the city of Spanish Fort, that was not when the additional phase into Stillwater came online 5 or 6 years ago, or when Stillwater did. My reading of the rules and regulations that have been adopted by the city are that Northwoods Phase 1 would have to have 2 entrances to State Highway 225. Otherwise, you've got Stillwater, which if approved today would have to have 2 entrances on 225. And then you're going to add Northwoods, which my reading of your regs is that they have to have 2 entrances on 225, even after the first phase, because if there's 30 or more single-family lots, they've got to have 2 separate and approved fire apparatus access roads. So I think you go from what would ultimately require 4 separate entrances down to 2, and I would submit to you all that that's a violation of the city's ordinance. The last thing that I would throw out there is there is a provision in that fire code that allows for required gates or barricades that can be approved by the fire officials, meaning that if you all agreed with my clients that increased construction traffic and then home construction traffic and then home occupancy traffic is going to impact the infrastructure at Stillwater, that with the fire marshal's approval, there could be a gate that prevents connectivity from that construction traffic. Fire officials would, of course, have full access. I think they actually have remotes and things where they can open it, but then we don't have all the Northwoods construction and residential traffic flowing through our neighborhood with what we believe is a plat that proposes only 1 connection to 225, when based on my ratings, at least 2 would be required. I know I'm bouncing around and throwing a lot at you, so happy to answer any questions that anyone has. And I know that some of the owners in Stillwater have also signed up, so they may have some other matters of concern. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next guest is looks like Andrew Briggs.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, my name is Andrew Briggs. I'm the current acting POA president for the Stillwater subdivision, and in full transparency, this is the first opportunity that I've had to come to one of these planning commission sessions as it relates to the Northwoods Phase 1 development, but I'll be brief. James pretty much touched on all of the areas of concern that we have. I will say, and you'll get to hear from some of our residents tonight, that it is a growing concern. You know, we are not in opposition to community growth. We know that that is going to happen. That's going to be a natural thing. So we're not in opposition to that, but we feel that there are a lot of unanswered questions that we have right now in terms of what this is going to mean and how it's going to relate to the residents of Stillwater. I mean, just as this evening, and again, this is my first opportunity to attend, there was a lot of unanswered questions in terms of the dam, who's going to be financially responsible for the upkeep of that. I don't think that it would be in good sense to be able to move forward or approve anything until a lot of these questions are fundamentally answered. And like I said, we're not opposed to community growth, but we think there needs to be better transparency, there needs to be better collaboration to the POAs that are going to be directly influenced by this upcoming development, to allow us, whether that's a town hall session or something, rather than a forum just like this, because there are just so many questions that we have. And out of respect for the citizens of Spanish Fort that we have here in the Stillwater community and the lakes as well, we've got some very passionate people about the area that they live in, and I think that we need to make sure that their questions are answered if we can be given the opportunity. So that's all I had to say. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Jason Sykes.
Good evening. Thanks again for allowing us to come and kind of voice our concerns here. I've been at this podium before, so I won't take too much of your time. I think a lot of the things I had to say have already been addressed by the two gentlemen before me, or the three actually. The only thing I will say is I am on the POA for Stillwater also, been on there for a number of years now. The responsibility that we have towards our members financially to look after the property is of great concern to me. It's been touched on a little bit, but as I'm sure you're all aware, most homeowner associations, there's a delicate balance between money coming in, how that money's spent, the perception of the residents. My concern with this, and as Andy very eloquently said, we're not opposed to development and growth in our area. We know that it's a hidden gem and it's going to happen. Our largest concern here is that the growth does not match the area and the demographic that's currently on that road, and it's going to damage property values, which is going to impact our ability to continue to maintain that neighborhood, particularly if the property value is damaged. It becomes harder to have dues that are commensurate with the upkeep that's going to be required by the area. So specifically with the siltation and the lakes and things of that nature. So that's really all I wanted to add to the conversation tonight, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Robin Delaney.
Thank you for your time. I represent Southland Gulf Company, one of the adjacent property owners. My first question is, as Mr. Connor pointed out, it is not really clear who is going to administer the process of this development, whether it falls to the city or the county. Specifically, I asked the city administrator, didn't get an answer. At what point in time are the landscaping, fencing, and highway buffer requirements presented for review? Secondly, as Mr. Connor discussed, the original master plan that was submitted included the entirety of the acreage owned by the developer. I asked what the future development area was going to be, how it was going to be used, as it's required in the city's master planning consideration. I was directed to the master plan lot plat, and the future development didn't have any indications of what it would be, nor did the city have any information. The issue of the reduced density, the increased density based on the 12,000 square foot lots of 160 lots, is a significant issue regarding runoff. I understand the engineers have studied this matter, but as was said previously, the topography and the impact on the previous designs of the lakes have not been considered. And if there would be a failure, the impact would be not just to the two adjacent subdivisions, but also to the downstream property owners and Bay Minette Creek. As I've said before, Highway 225 is a state scenic byway, and I've requested that the buffer be greater than is prescribed to be 30 feet. The ALDOT review that addresses just the right-hand turn lane for this phase of the total property may or may not affect the 30-foot buffer, may or may not allow for the 30-foot buffer to remain. The future development, the engineer pointed out, would likely cause a need for a north and south turn lane, which would again encroach on the contemplated 30-foot buffer strip. The other consideration that needs to be made with the increased future development is the entrance to this subdivision is at a very severe grade on Highway 225. It is essentially a blind spot, and it, even during the construction process, before the turn lane is put in, would be a problem. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Bar something. You see that?
Come on, you got shit black.
Okay. Right here.
Derbyshire?
Yeah, I figured that's what it was.
There you go.
Okay, thank.
Is this ready to talk? Okay, all right. Hi, my name's Dave Derbyshire. Thank every one of you for your service. I appreciate what you do. And thank you for that prayer tonight as well. I live at 34201 Farrington Lane. I'm the oldest resident on Farrington Lane. So we have watched that street develop over the last 7 years. And one of the obvious things is increasingly younger and younger families are moving into our neighborhood. And that's a beautiful thing, and a lot of little children. Maybe it's because I'm getting old. I can appreciate it. But I don't know about the silt and the ponds and all that stuff, but that many houses cutting through Stillwater subdivision is a recipe for disaster for these children and for people that are living there. It's too much. And it seems to me that if you can figure out how to buy a plot of land that big to put a subdivision on, from the get-go, you should be able to figure out how to put two entrances in your own subdivision. So I'm opposed to anything that runs through Stillwater. I understand a right-of-way for the fire department. That makes sense on that level. But to just use Stillwater and Farrington Lane or I'm not sure, I can't see real well, but I notice that those houses that are to be built run, one of them perpendicular to my backyard lot line. So that changes the whole dynamic for me. But my bigger concern is the traffic that's going to be coming through there, and I'm opposed to anything that would allow that subdivision to cut through Stillwater. Thank you so much for your time and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Heidi Elliott.
Thank you for your time this evening. I just want to reiterate what Mr. Darbyshire said in that I would like the commission to consider going back, requiring a redesign of the Northwood subdivision where they would be required to have the 2 entrance and exits and not rely on Stillwater subdivision for that second entrance and exit. And then I have a question regarding resolution number 1284-2022. The City Council on December the 5th authorized the mayor to execute an agreement for engineering services between the City of Spanish Fort, Alabama and Dewberry Engineerings. Does the Planning Commission consider this a conflict of interest? And if not, then why? Thank you.
Thank you. Ginger Grady.
Good evening. My name is Ginger Gaddy. I live at 33744 Boardwalk Drive. I actually live on the entrance of Stillwater, and I am also one of the lake owners. I'm not going to reiterate what everybody has said, but I do oppose the connectivity of this neighborhood to Stillwater. I have concerns that it does burden our neighborhood. It poses safety concerns, it's runoff concerns, and then also financially burdens our homeowners by this decision. So I would just indicate that I'm opposing the connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you. Brandon Stokely.
Hello. So my biggest concern is the traffic. I'm one of the ones that has a 5-year-old little girl, so that's why I oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments? If not, the public hearing is closed. Matthew, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I was taking some notes. Let me look through these real quick and see which ones I may be able to assist with. There was a question regarding the utilities and whether the utility providers would be able to provide the necessary service. The applicant did submit will serve letters from the utility companies that are listed on the plat. In regard to traffic, the applicant did submit a traffic study that shows the impacts to 225. I would defer to the applicant to address whether or not there are impacts within the Stillwater subdivision. He may be able to speak to that a little better than I can. There were some comments about the concerns about the detention ponds within the Stillwater subdivision, and I would point out that the Northwoods subdivision does not share common detention ponds with Stillwater. So the water from Northwoods will not enter into the Stillwater detention ponds. It will enter into the lakes, which we've talked about a fair amount. The applicant did, their engineer did prepare a drainage study that considered the impacts from the proposed subdivision on the lakes, and that report met all the requirements of the Spanish Fort regulations.
Matthew, real quick.
Sure.
From the last meeting, I did have a note here about the concerns we had for the drainage issues, the detention, retention. And I think you were going to get back with us. How is it being handled for the entire development? Because I know we were just looking at the first phase, but I definitely remember making some notes here that, you know, that we couldn't dump any water at all on the surrounding subdivisions.
Right, so in one of the initial submittals that we received from the applicant, there was a detention pond right here that discharged to the Stillwater subdivision. We had a lot of concerns about that detention pond, and concentrating that flow into those properties right here did not seem like a good thing to do, regardless of whether the letter of the law was actually met. So they went back to the drawing board, removed the detention pond. They're collecting all this water in a system here and routing it a different direction away from this subdivision here, so it won't impact Stillwater. I think that may be what you're...
No, what my point was that I was making, I wanted to see the drainage for the entire development. And I know this is just the first phase, but I was more concerned with the entire 3 or 4 phases. And have we addressed that?
We normally address the drainage as each phase is submitted in its construction drawings and plans at that time. Now, if, for example, sometimes they may want to front end load and create a large detention area in a phase that will service subsequent phases, and if they do, then they would submit the drawings for that. But it'll be incumbent upon them to handle their drainage in each phase as they submit. We don't normally require construction drawings for the whole master plan as it goes forward. That you guys, if I'm wrong about that, correct me, but I think that's right.
No, I agree with that, but I think we had some special considerations for sandwiching in a subdivision in between 2 existing subdivisions. And I remember our conversations on the commission that was a concern for all of us at that time.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, and again, it has been a while since it's been coming up. The detention is going into the lakes pond. So
Right.
Our understanding is the capacity is there to handle that. There was some confusion, I think, about, somebody had mentioned about having a joint agreement signed by the property owners associations to maintain the dam. I think you were inferring the Northwoods Association and the Lakes Association, not Stillwater. Stillwater would have no responsibility for maintenance of that, as I understand it, unless you tell me differently. And so the big issue on drainage that we focused on there originally is at the beginning. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Right there. Those lots were sheet flowing down to the back in a detention pond, and there was concern about whether or not they would overflow the neighboring property owners, and we challenged them to change that, I think to remove that detention pond and take that water somewhere else. Is that right, Matthew?
That's right. That's correct.
And so that, we had focused on that a good bit. There was some discussion about whether or not you'd have a detention pond on each lot, and we didn't like that. We didn't like having a joint one there because people build fences over the detention ponds. It just didn't work, so we challenged them to get rid of that to protect those property owners on that north line there at Stillwater as best it could be protected. And those were the things we were focusing on at that moment. I don't remember us talking about detention in the future, but they will have to address that either on site in their subsequent phases or in existing facilities outside of the Stillwater property, unless they've got some easements or rights that give them the authority to drain there.
Yeah, I would just add that because of that one spot that we did have a major conversation about that just opened up a lot of questions as to the topography of the entire site and what was gonna happen with future phases, the same situation we had here. And I know we can't address it because they're not on paper yet.
But when whoever looks at this, whether it's the City of Spanish Fork Planning Commission or the county, due to the nature and location of this between these, it needs to have a heightened review like we did on this phase to make sure that subsequent phases don't impact. I mean, when the next phase comes up, we need to have the same or heightened review that you've done here. No, I had the mic off. You're exactly right. We need to have a heightened review each time.
There was a question about the buffer requirements. This plan currently is in compliance with the required highway setback. I think the comment may have been in regard to a planned, what is it called, scenic highway?
Scenic byway.
Yeah, that I think that the county is currently developing and proposing and working toward. I'm not sure that it's something that's required yet, nor is it something that's in any of the Spanish Fork regulations. Now, obviously, if it were in place, we'd work with the county to make sure that it was.
The byway designation, I don't think is recognized in Spanish Fork's regulations
Right.
per se, but the construction setback, highway setback legislation
Yes.
is. So that would be the question I have. Are they setback, and do they meet the requirements of that setback? Because that's a pretty healthy setback.
They meet the requirements for the highway setback.
Okay.
There was a question about site distance concerns. I'll let the applicant speak toward that. And I think that's most of the points that I could touch on. David, maybe there's some that you'd like to touch on.
And Mr. Chairman, it's great to have people show up and ask questions because they're very good questions, and I'm going to try and answer the ones that I can answer, and then the applicant may have to answer some as well. As it relates to the master plan approval, my recollection about this is this property is zoned R3 in the county? R what? 4, I believe. Which is how many units an acre?
Can't speak to it right off of that.
Okay. But we're through the working process that we've gone through, y'all's original plan at the county, if I'm not mistaken, was a PUD that may have even
It was a
included.
different engineering company. I'm not
But-
too sure about
but-
it. It was a PRD. They were
And-
trying to get a different zoning. We are going by right, what the county allows.
And did it also include a multifamily component at
It
that time?
did, and
So-
this does not.
At least through this process, the density and the use has come down from what I'm told was pending before the county at that time. And so the question the gentleman asked was, on the master plan, how does the master plan affect the phasing? And what should happen is the master plan gives you an overall layout of what they're proposing to do, and then the subsequent phases, they got 3 phases, they will generally submit that site plan or that preliminary plat for the next phase in alignment with what's been approved in the master plan. Things can change, but generally that's what you're looking at. And the reason that you ask for the master plan is because that directly impacts things like traffic. You know, we had the discussion earlier, if you're gonna have 500 housing in there, there's a different traffic impact than 160 houses. And so, the master plan that's been approved, in theory, would be the one that is followed, in the subsequent phases unless there's an amendment to that. The size of the lots and concern about that, you know, really is a zoning function. If you didn't have zoning, you'd have to meet the minimum lot size requirements under the subdivision regulations, but this property is zoned, and at R4, it's a relatively high density, and that's not a city zoning, that's a county zoning issue. So in that case, the lots may not be as large as you want them to be, but the density is also not near as high as it could be, based on that zoning, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right about that? Okay. But the city doesn't have any control over the zoning, it only has control over the subdivision of the property. The zoning is a county issue. the entrance question, and I know that's probably gonna be a question that we have here, and Matthew, you'll have to help me too. Do we have anybody from the fire department here? We do. The way we've interpreted that in the past is, that a subdivision has to have at least 2 accesses to a public road once you get above 30 lots in the development. And this is probably not something the Stillwater folks want to hear, but the roads in Stillwater are public roads. And Highway 225 is a public road, and Stillwater had those turnouts in place. I mean, there was obviously some planning at some point in time in the process that there might be subsequent phases that tie to those roads, because they're not cul-de-sacs, they're stub outs. And so technically, unless somebody can show us differently about that requirement is met. And in this case, there's wetlands up to the top of this entrance that's not being developed. Is that right? Matthew? To the top of the phase there, north of the line, that's all wetlands. Yeah, that's all wetlands in that area, right?
No, that's actually phase 3.
Okay, okay. So phase 3 is gonna have how many lots?
It's not many. 20.
Okay. As to the applicant, the question came up about street maintenance. The cities, and I'm just going to apologize on behalf of the legislature, I guess. I mean, the way that these statutes are drafted are difficult to understand, and sometimes even more difficult to communicate, and anybody that's confused about it, you have a right to be. It's just the nature of how this has been developed over time. But are y'all building the roads to the county standards?
The greater of the two.
All right, so
Yours
the
and
more
county.
stringent standard between the county and the city is what you're building to?
Yes, sir.
All right. And the reason that that's important is, in the ETJ, the way the statute reads, the responsibility for maintenance in the ETJ outside the corporate limits of the city would fall upon the county. But the statute also says, unless the streets are built to the standards adopted by the county and signed off on by the county engineer, the county does not have to accept them for maintenance. So in this case, we're comfortable that they're building them to the county standards. And has it been submitted for review?
I'm comfortable that they have met all of the Spanish Fort requirements, which likely are stiffer than the county's requirements.
Okay, you just need to make sure about that in the process, because if they're ultimately not, that's something that needs to be addressed. There was a question about the city's master plan and whether or not it met the city's master plan, but the way that the regulations in the law work is a master plan basically is a zoning function. That you prepare a master plan for land use for your municipality. And so in this area, the city's master plan, the question was, how does this work in the city's master plan? Well, the city's master plan technically doesn't cover that because the city doesn't have zoning authority. The county's master plan would govern that. And I'm assuming that if it's zoned R3, R4, whatever it was, that compliance, that you're not asking for a rezoning, you're just asking for a subdivision at this point. So, and as it goes forward, the building permitting on this would go to the county. The county issues the building permits, does the inspections, the county enforces the zoning ordinance. The city's really only responsibility in this is to review the subdivision and make sure it meets the minimum requirements of the subdivision regulations. And then lastly, there was a question about Resolution 1284-722 and whether or not the fact that the city enters into agreements with Dewberry creates a conflict of interest for the Planning Commission. And I would say the answer to that is no. The city retains the services of multiple engineering firms from Goodwood Mills and Kaywood, Dewberry, Thompson, you can go down the list. Those are done based on contract by contract basis, hourly billings, and the Planning Commission doesn't even vote on those. That's a city council issue, and they give engineering and consulting advice. And so I would tell you that there is no conflict of interest, and I think that most those engineer firms, if you ask them, if anything, they probably get treated harder if they got a contract with us, because we expect them to do things the right way. If I've missed a question, or if Matthew's missed a question, council, let us know. I think that generally answers most of the questions that were raised. If we've missed some, please let us know.
I did have,
There were a few. I think the developers actually Dilworth Development, not Dilworth Homes. So that is owned by Mr. Dilworth, and they are still in business. The point of entry, we spoke a little bit about that. The previous plan that another engineering company did, it had it a little bit north, and it technically didn't work because of safety concerns on 225 with the sight distance. We picked the top of the hill so you can see left and right out of there with plenty of sight distance. So we're good. That's another reason another access would be very difficult, if not be too dangerous to the north. The access to Stillwater is only done because it is required by you guys as a second access. There were 2 more accesses on other right-of-ways that the previous plan showed that we tried to eliminate so that we have the least amount of impacts to Stillwater as possible. We spoke about the drainage. This drainage is all flowing to the north through the existing lakes. And there is, in the drainage plan, I believe, Kevin, you were asking, both those lakes were analyzed, and Matthew could give you a copy of that if you'd like to see that.
The only other question I had, and we do always have concerns about damage to existing roads. How are you proposing to do your construction entrances, manage that as it relates to the construction?
Everything would be coming off of 225. There would be nothing through Stillwater. The county will be watching Stillwater's access, and AlDOT will be watching the access up there, as well as Baldwin County inspecting the entire neighborhood. I'm sure you guys would, as it's being built. Yes, sir. I wouldn't see them going all the way through Stillwater to get back up there.
I have a question. Mr. Delaney, I think, brought up an issue, and well, you might have just addressed it. I just want to clarify about the entrance. And I know we've approved an allowance here to use the county's maximum grade instead of ours. So what is the grade at the entrance to 225? Is that something that
It's not very much, if anything, around 1-2% maybe. I mean, where we start to slope off is where we get about the 10%. The county's max is 15. Your guys' max was 7. They're county roads.
So it's not 15%. That's not where the max is going to be.
No, ours is 10, 11, somewhere around there for a brief period.
Going through my notes, I think Mr. Connor and Matthew and the engineers of record have addressed every question I had. Just want to assure that, you know, the dam upkeep is not going to be responsibility of Stillwater in any form or fashion. The roads upkeep, I'm good to hear that the construction traffic wouldn't go through Stillwater, but, you know, that is a county road situation, and they are responsible for keeping up with those roads in those neighborhoods. I'm glad to hear that the water flow is to the north and not into Stillwater. So those are all positive things as far as I'm concerned. You know, I look at Stillwater and you see several stubbed out roads. Obviously, they were talking about extending or connectivity in the other roads. So I think as Mr. Connor mentioned that, it's not cul-de-sacs. So it was intended to be that way. whether they said anything about it or not. Traffic studies have been required and been met. And as Mr. Connor mentioned, you know, our conflicts with Dewberry, we have we have contracts with engineers every project everywhere. So I think that particular Dewberry contract was probably the case on Trace core permits that we have to take care of some things. So there's certainly no conflicts there. So that's all my answers.
And to piggyback off what the mayor just said, and so we don't lose that in nuance, how many stub outs were there initially? 4 stub outs. And so through our discussions and trying to address the concerns of the Stillwater residents, they've been reduced to how many?
In the master plan, it shows 2.
So just 2. And then, in theory, if we're trying to talk about impacts, that phase and the other phase, is that phase 3 right above this is going to have 20 lots?
Yes, sir.
So those 77 lots there, based on the layout and how you get in and out, I can't see why anybody would go through Stillwater to access those 77 lots. Now, I can't speak to what happens on the backside, but.
More so, I'd see Stillwater coming through there, but yes, sir.
Sorry?
Yes, sir. I
mean,
agree.
certainly the 20's not going to go to Stillwater because they're only going to have access directly off 225. These folks right here would have to be driving out of their way.
And I know we spoke about a gate. If these weren't Baldwin County rules, I mean, roads, I know you guys have allowed gates in the past, but Baldwin County likely won't allow a gate. Or
I can tell you, we've got one gate in the city, and as far as I'm voting, I will never vote on another one.
David, real quick, if you could, I heard so many things from Mr. Pittman, and I would like to get a comfortable feel from you based on some of the issues that he raised. I don't really have a problem if we need to slow down on this approval based on what I heard from Mr. Pittman, and I just want you to address some of those issues. I know y'all had a conversation.
Well, I got a lot of respect for James, and I can't say that I understand every issue the way that he understands them. I mean, he's been representing them all this time, and so all I can say is from what I heard and what I wrote down is that there had been some siltation and detention ponds and some other issues in the past that have now been corrected with Truland. James, is that correct? And so those items have now been addressed. Is it related to this property that occurred? Well, you have something you want to say?
yeah, I was just going to say he is correct. Lots 1 through 11 do flow back to Stillwater, but what you can't see is that road cuts off about 2 acres of that water that does run through there, which takes a significantly less load that way. Plus, lots 3 through 11 have a pretty significant ditch behind them that will pick up any water or silt that catches it before it runs through the 2 to 3 acres of woods that it would enter those houses. Lots 12 and running through 16 have a concrete ditch that directs back to the northeast into that wetland draw that takes it into the lakes. So my goal in looking at
Who
this,
maintains that concrete ditch, may I ask?
the easement is by Stillwater. We have, it's in a drainage easement, so technically, I guess Stillwater would. That catches all that water that goes down through there. We have BMPs set up to catch any kind of silts or anything going through there. When the home builders come in, ADEM's watching them like a hawk. They would have set up BMPs too and remove any silt before they've released their permit.
Well, I was supposed to say that there would have to be some pretty hefty BMPs and monitoring to make sure that happens. That's gonna be up to the county to monitor because we don't do building permitting out there.
With the topography out here, it's definitely a challenge.
But I completely understand, and I think you should too,
Absolutely.
Stillwater's concerns about impacts from neighboring developers causing them problems and then not being able to get it fixed. So I think that's something that y'all need to be sensitive to, obviously, as you're doing that. But I don't know, it's almost like asking the government, which the government has no responsibility here for maintaining it, asking the government to figure out some way to build in a protection for something that might happen in this case. And I don't know how you do that. I mean, it's a private right of action. If you damage their property, you're responsible. But that's neither here nor there. That's beyond our scope in this. The street maintenance standards was the other thing that was talked about, is whose responsibility for maintenance. And, you know, in the unincorporated areas, if Baldwin County has accepted those streets for maintenance, they're responsible for maintaining them. As it relates to Northwoods, if this subdivision plat is approved, and if they meet the county's requirements and the county engineer signs off on that, then the county will accept those streets for maintenance. The other question had to do with the two entrances on 225, and that's why I tried to answer that. I mean, James has a very good point as it relates to that language, but that's the whole reason where you all required the connectivity, was to maintain multiple accesses out. In some places, you know, we have required, and you could require a boulevard. Let's say, for example, we say, okay, we want two entrances off 225. Well, we can make them redesign this and come up here and put an entrance right there, and it's not going to change your world any, because you're concerned about people driving through back here. The impact, if we put another road up here, is going to be nothing. I mean, and that would meet, technically that would meet the requirements of having two accesses if there wasn't some somewhere else. I just don't know how that would make it better for you. Well, it would certainly cost them some more money. I just don't know that it would change the world for you, but I understand. But in any event, I think, unless somebody can tell me different, that's an engineering function. I think they meet the fire code requirements based on what y'all reviewed and submitted. So that was the question that James was raising, and it's a good question, and we battled that, and that's one of the reasons we have the one or two gates that we don't like in the city, is that we had situations where the city had approved subdivisions in the past, like Stillwater, that only had one way in and one way out, and then subsequently we had the opportunity to at least install an emergency gate between two neighboring subdivisions to create that opportunity. But that was a retrofit, and here we don't have to retrofit because it's all available in there.
Any additional discussion?
I guess I just want to clarify what you just said. You are saying that we could accommodate the two, or the developer could accommodate the two entries and exits without connecting to Stillwater?
In theory, you could make a boulevard effect here. and conceivably satisfy that requirement, but I think you might run into a problem because you're really only providing access to the first 20 lots. It's the other 125 lots back here that you still wouldn't have a way out. You have a wreck right there, everybody's locked in. There's no way to get out. You have a chemical spill or something here. The idea is to provide access for as many lots as you can, and that right there would aesthetically look like two entrances, but it would virtually have no effect in the long term about servicing those 160 lots.
How wide is that entrance on 225? Is it a possibility of a boulevard effect up there as opposed to just a single lane coming out? I know it takes some adjustments on your side, but you own the property to the north.
Do you mean like 2 lanes on each side coming in and out?
Yeah.
It's, if I'm not correct, it's pretty wide. It's 16 foot
it looks
on each.
wider, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, we have 16 foot on either side with an island running through the middle.
Well, that's not wide enough for 2 lanes on each side then.
No.
I'm not sure you really want 2 lanes either, because that creates a safety issue on 225. Do you happen to know the phase, what do you call it, phase 3 to the north? Are they planning another entrance up there?
No, sir.
You don't know, or you don't think they are?
They are not.
It's very important that we have connectivity. It's very important that we allow our emergency vehicles to maneuver between neighborhoods. So, I mean, I like what you're saying, Kirk. I do. I'd love to keep the traffic out of Stillwater, but it's more of an element. We're responsible for health, safety, welfare, and that's a part of it.
I've been sitting here listening to everybody and trying to figure out in my head exactly what direction I want to go with this. I've never been a big fan of the connectivity thing. It's just, I realize Mr. Connor said, you know, these streets in Stillwater, they're county maintained, and I guess there's certain rights to go along with that. But at the same time, you know, the people that live in these neighborhoods, you know, they have a voice, and obviously we've heard that loud and clear. And I struggle with whether or not it's the right thing to allow another neighborhood like this to connect in when in fact they do have land here that, you know, may not be, you know, open to the eye right now to see if it works or not. But, you know, I just struggle with supporting this from the connectivity standpoint. That's just where I am with it right now. I'm a member of the commission, yes, but I'm also a citizen, and I hear them.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit too. In the past, we've done this, but it's been in Spanish Fort neighborhoods, and Stillwater. Is that city? County. It's county. So I don't know. It feels a little bit like we're I know it's still our ETJ, so it's, golly, this is tough.
Just to help you with that struggle a little bit. You make the best decision that you can with whatever application comes in front of you. So you need to judge it that way and treat it as if it was in the city. I mean, I don't think you treat it any less. We wouldn't treat any subdivision in the city any less or more. I think you have to give it the same depth and work and ethic that you apply to it in reviewing it. As it relates to the, I'm trying to think what I'm trying to say. You were talking about the connectivity. Tell me what you said again. There's something that triggered me that.
Well, I was just asking if Stillwater is a Spanish Fort. It's not in the city.
It's not, that's right. It's not in the city, and neither is this either. But again, we bring to the table our best efforts to review it. It's required to meet our subdivision regulations under the statute. And the reason that we in particular, or you all in particular, wanted an ETJ is because, this is what I was trying to get to. In the areas that you all plan to potentially annex in the future, at some point in time, you want to try and make sure that those areas look more like your city and meet your regulations, or otherwise, when it does come in, you have a lot of non-conforming uses, you had a lot of issues that are different. It used to be more important when the county's regs and the city's regs were further apart. For example, sometimes they didn't require sidewalks, we did, but those things have changed. But the main thing is I think you look at it with the idea that you apply our standards to it as if it was here, to try and get the best product you can for the people in the area, in that place. For what that's worth.
And I will say that I do live in a neighborhood where we were forced to connect to an adjacent, neighborhood, and there was a lot of fear by both sides about what that would do, and it's been zero impact. I mean, we use our street and they use theirs, and there's really no crossover. But that's just, and we've had situations where we did have a wreck at the end of entrance to our neighborhood and so forth, and it impacted emergency services. So I don't want to be inconsistent on that either. So
I would just say, whether y'all ultimately approve this or not, and I don't have a vote, and that's up to y'all. The process has been good. I think it's only gotten better based on public participation, the demands that you all have made, and whether or not you ultimately approve it. But I think it's miles ahead of where it started, for what that's worth, based on y'all's work.
We made a lot of headway when you did away with multifamily. I mean, that was a big concern, and I appreciate that. And doing away with, I think there were 4 stub outs or 4 connections, and reducing it to 2. Long term, I think that's good. I don't personally feel that this stub out here is going to cause a major. Most people that live on that street are going to go out right that street. They're not going to cut through Stillwater just for natural flow, unless there's an accident somewhere. And that's the purpose of having connectivity, in my opinion. I go back to health, safety, welfare. That's what we got to look out for. It's not always an easy decision. Let me tell you, I'd love to say, oh, no stub outs, no nothing, because I got a lot of friends in Stillwater. I know I'm going to catch a lot of grief on this. But I do believe we need that connection. We've proven it too many times in our city already, and we have taken that path several times in our city to make sure there's connectivity. And this, while it's not in our city, we need to treat it exactly the same.
I just kind of want to echo what Keith said. We are all lay folks of the community, and I really understand about property values. I think Stillwater is one of the finest subdivisions in Spanish Fort. There's been a lot of investment made out there, and I just think about what Keith said. Personally, I would feel a lot better just connecting them based on the product that's going to be built in this subdivision. Hadn't been talked about. Square footage, home price. I think if Stillwater, if a lot of community here knew that their property values are going to be equal to are close to with the investment that these guys have made in Stillwater, it would probably give them a more comfortable feeling about connectivity. I know that's outside of this commission's scope and outside of what we normally discuss, but I just like the people to know what we're thinking about constantly, and that is one of them. They're worried about property values, and I get it. So I'll close.
Any additional comments? If not, do we get a motion?
Ms. Connor, I don't normally make motions in this because I like to hear from the commission, but hearing no one making a motion, it gives us an opportunity to vote it up or vote it down so we can make this motion. So I'll make a motion. Is this a recommendation to the council?
This will be a motion either to approve or deny the subdivision plat. It doesn't go to the council, it's just here. I would remind you and suggest that if you're making a motion to deny it, you have to state the reasons why you're denying it, and that's be in writing. If you're making a motion to approve, I think you at least ought to include that additional condition that the subdivision.
I'm gonna let you make
I'm gonna make a
speech on the condition.
make a recommendation
Okay.
that the motion would be conditioned upon the plat reflecting that the dam on the lakes would be maintained by the Property Owners Association, would not be maintained by any governmental entities, including but not limited to the city of Spanish Fort and or Baldwin County.
And David, that motion or approval also needs to include the waiver to the road grade standards that they've requested in one way or another.
So I'd like to make a motion that we approved Planning Commission case number 221103 with the stipulations that Mr. Connor and Casey have just spoke of.
And that would be the stipulation on the plat and the waiver of the grade requirement.
Need our glasses?
Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Davis,
I don't feel real good about this one, so I would say no.
Diamond,
Got too many questions still. I'm gonna say no. I got too many questions.
Vaughn,
I'm going to say no as well.
Lindsay,
No.
Smith,
No.
Tucker,
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
All right, then, for the record, we need to state the reasons for the denial so that they can be submitted in writing to the property owner. So they, by statute, we're required to do that. So we need to state the reasons for the denial. Well, I need to know what they are, and then we'll probably do a motion or something along those lines to make sure we're clear. But we have to be able to express in writing to them what the reasons for the denial are.
I mean, for me, I'll just say, I still think there's too many unanswered questions. There's just too much opposition and, things that, there are a lot of things going on that I don't have time at this particular minute to, come up with a final answer. So that's where I am.
I think
Mr. Connor, and you tell me if we can do this. I know we have voted to deny, but can we table this to the next meeting to come up with your reasons for denial?
No, what I need to do is, we need to go into executive session just for a minute and have a discussion. And then we'll come back. So I'm gonna make a recommendation, we go in executive session in accordance with Alabama Code Section 36-25A7A1 to discuss general reputation, professional competence, and mental health of certain individuals or subject to limitations set forth therein, to discuss the job performance of certain public employees, and also discuss the legal ramifications of and legal options for pending litigation, controversies not yet being litigated but imminently likely to be litigated, or imminently likely to be litigated if the governmental body pursues a proposed course of action. It's anticipated executive session will last approximately 15 minutes, at which time we'll reconvene this meeting and continue on with the discussion. I make the oral declaration that discussion is appropriate for executive session. And a motion and a second, and a roll call vote.
Motion,
Second.
roll call.
Wait, we just did that wrong. Chairman can't make the motion.
Yeah, Chairman, somebody else has got to make the motion.
Make the motion, go into executive session.
All right, and then we need a second and a roll call.
Second.
Okay.
Roll call, Karen?
Davis. Diamond.
Yes.
Vaughn. Lindsay. Smith. Tucker.
Yes.
McMillan.
Chairman, before you start, I gotta go to the restroom.
We're waiting on the city attorney. He had to take care of business real quick.
I'd like to bring the meeting back to order. Thank you. We need to talk about the denial.
Yes, sir.
Or
Mr.
why
Chairman.
we
Mr. Chairman.
voted the way we did.
Mr. Chairman, the statute says that if a subdivision plat is denied, the reasons have to be stated on the record. And so we need to have that discussion and state what those reasons are.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we reconsider the vote on the previous item.
No, second.
Okay, it's been motioned and second that we reconsider this agenda item. And it's open only to the commissioners at this point.
Mr. Chairman, we still need a discussion on the reasons for denial.
You need to have that discussion now that you have your motion and your second.
Roll call.
No, no.
Whoa.
If someone, let's back that up. If we could take those motions back, just withdraw those motions.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. Let's keep our order correct here. You have to be able to state reasons for denial. If you have reasons for denial, we need to state what they are. If we don't, we need to talk about that. If there was confusion, we need to talk about that. So if we need to be able to have that discussion to decide what the appropriate action would be at that point in time.
Some of my earlier concerns were definitely property values and stuff that's really outside the control of this commission. If you kind of think about it, it kind of goes back to eminent domain and us as a commission trying to tell somebody what they cannot do with their property, which we're not in the business of doing. We don't need to be in the business of doing. So that's one consideration that I think if we want to discuss it after further discussion, I feel like maybe that the property and the developer meets most of our regulations either in the county and the city. That's some of my concerns, but some of my concerns that James brought up, and we did write those down, and if we want to try to open that back up for discussion a little bit, Mike, of what James mentioned,
Well,
and I'll be glad to read them.
I'll get our glasses. And I think I wrote a pretty
Here.
solid, I think I made a pretty solid list of what Mr. Pittman spoke about. Talked about the siltation of the detention pond, which I think was resolved between the previous developer. Would have nothing to do with this development because the flow does not go into Stillwater detention. Traffic flow was talking about access points within the two proposed neighborhoods. He talked about repaving of Stillwater, which is done by the county and not by the neighborhood naturally. We talked about detention ponds. Here again, the detention for the proposed North Woods would flow to the north and not to Stillwater's detention. And talked about a traffic study for Stillwater with what traffic would be done into there. And then later on talked about one other item, David, and I'm grasping to remember what that was.
Maintenance of the streets was one.
Maintenance of the streets. Sheet flow, yes, which was addressed by the architect, engineer of the project, that it is not as drastic because this 2.5 to 3 acres that was coming into Stillwater that now will not be developed, which will help the sheet flow. Plus, they're capturing some of the water with piping and moving it out, which will go back to the other side of the Northwood subdivision. And I think that's got it.
It would seem to me, after rethinking and listening to the regulations that have been put out here, that they have been met, even though I may not really agree with all of them, but they have been met, and so it's not our. I feel like it's probably the right thing to do to look at this again and make sure that we do make the right decision.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Just that, you know, we want to do the right thing by everybody, and definitely want to do the right thing by neighbors, but also by the developer. And we've, you know, we've got to consider the master plan that we've already approved, and rethinking it, and just really looking at other options for second entrances. They're just not good, and so we, you know, we do need to make sure that we're approving or denying this based on the documents before us and the subdivision regulations and whether or not they're being met or not. So,
in my opinion, the preliminary plat meets our requirements, even though I don't have a good feel about it, but they met the requirements. So that's my explanation and way I feel about it. So,
Mr. Chairman, procedurally, either through staff or your own thoughts, we need to state reasons for denial. And if there are no reasons for denial that we can state, that it doesn't meet the subregs or that it's in violation somehow of something, then a motion to reconsider would be appropriate to bring the matter back up the table for discussion. Because by law, we have to state the reason, and if we can't, then that's a difficult position to be in. So,
okay, by law, they meet the requirements that we asked of them.
then I would suggest, if you don't have any, I would suggest that somebody make a motion to reconsider. Only the people who voted on the winning side can make a motion to reconsider and second, so.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to reconsider.
Some of my reasons for denial was the traffic study that was mentioned for the entire 225 corridor through that area. That was, you know, I felt like the traffic study for the entire area needed to be done. A little issue with connectivity, which I know we don't control as far as property values. That was another reason for my denial. So just to bring those up to talk about. But I think, you know, I think after further consideration, personally, I think most folks that bought in Stillwater knew that was gonna be a development, either another phase of Stillwater or that property was always gonna be developed. Because it's very prime property as far as along Bay Minette Creek. And the water features of that property. So it was coming, and I just wanted it to be controlled a little bit better, and I wanted all our constituents to be satisfied with the development. I felt like you were not. Maybe it swayed a little bit the way I voted, but after reconsidering, it does meet a lot of our requirements of the county and the city. And the density of that property is a lot less than it was originally going to be. That's, so, it's not a dog and pony show. Bottom line is we care about these people, and we're out here trying to fight for y'all. So there's nothing going on up here. There's no underhanded happening here. It's just we also represent you guys, but we also represent people who do everything the right way, and I feel like this developer has in a lot of ways. I'll close with that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we reconsider the previous item.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Davis,
Yes.
Diamond,
Yes.
Vaughn,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Tucker,
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
So procedurally, this brings the item back up, and then you either have to vote to approve, or you have to vote to deny and state reasons why you're denying it.
Does procedurally, does the prevailing party need to make that motion, or can it come from anybody?
I think it can come from anybody after it comes back to the table, I think.
In that case, I'd like to make a motion that the planning commission approves application for preliminary plat, agenda item 221103. With the conditions previously stated, with the grade, and Mr. Garner, exactly what you said with the, on the,
Staff recommended a waiver of the grade
Right.
requirements. And then if you vote to approve this, I would suggest that you push we recommend you put a note on the plat to state that the dam would be maintained by the property owners associations and not by any governmental entity, including but not limited to Baldwin County or the city of Spanish Fork.
that's what I said.
Second.
Roll call.
Davis,
Yes.
Diamond,
Yes.
Vaughn,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Tucker,
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
Motion has been approved. The next item on the agenda is 221201, application for site plan. Casey?
Mr. Chairman, this was the site plan application for Ball and Bone and Joint, and as we discussed at the work session, this one's been requested to be postponed until the next meeting.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is agenda item 230201, application for land use. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, before we get off into this one too far, this one was posted for public hearing, right?
Land use, no. We've typically, we've never done a public hearing for land use.
All right. This is for Planning Commission approval?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I hate to do this to you, but we got to go to executive session one more time, just briefly. Make a recommendation, we go in executive session in accordance with Alabama Code Section 36-25A7A3 to discuss the legal ramifications of and legal options for pending litigation, controversy not yet being litigated but imminently likely to be litigated with the government body procedure post course of action. It's anticipated executive session will last approximately 5 minutes, at which time we'll reconvene. I make the oral declaration discussion is appropriate for executive session.
Motion?
So moved.
It's been motion and second that we go into executive session.
Roll call.
Roll call afterwards.
Davis.
Yes.
Diamond.
Yes.
Vaughn. Lindsay. Smith.
Yes.
Tucker.
Yes.
McMillan.
I'd like to call the meeting back to order. Returning to agenda item 230201, application for site plan. Oh, excuse me. 230201, application for land use. Thank you. Casey?
Mr. Chairman, this one is a application for land use at 101 Marcella Avenue. The applicant's proposing to renovate the existing structure on the property to be used as a restaurant. The site is located along US Highway 31. It's currently zoned B2 local business with properties on 3 out of 4 sides having the same zoning. Property is currently vacant and for sale, but has been used as a residence up until this point. The proposed use as a restaurant is allowed in B2 zoning only by Planning Commission approval, according to the table of permitted uses found in the zoning ordinance. The subject property is identified as professional and local business in the Comprehensive Plan's future land use map. The overall site will require additional improvements and a site plan approval before it can be utilized as the proposed use of a restaurant. At that time, staff will work with the applicant to ensure all site plan requirements are met as required. The staff has reviewed the submitted information regarding this application and has found the proposed use to be in compliance with the Spanish Fort zoning ordinance and that the proposed use is allowed at this site with Planning Commission approval. Staff would like to make note that the approval of this application for land use by the Planning Commission does not constitute approval of any site plans or building plans as submitted thus far, and the applicant will still need to seek appropriate approvals prior to making any site changes on the property. Pending any further comments and or requirements by the Planning Commission for this site, and staff recommends the Planning Commission approve agenda item 230201, application for land use for restaurant in B2 at 101 Marcella Avenue.
Okay, is there any discussion on this item?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the use for restaurant for agenda item number 230201.
Second.
Discussion on the motion.
Discussion?
Only that, I think the commission, we'll see how they vote, but I personally think it's a fine use for the property there. I just want to let Mr. Tan know that there'll be a lot of improvements required based on site plan and parking and things like that. So we'll look at that at the time it comes, just for property improvements. I have no problem with the land use there.
Additional discussion? Roll call.
Davis. Diamond.
Yes.
Vaughn.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Tucker.
Yes.
McMillan.
Yes.
Next agenda item is 230202, application for minor subdivision plat. Casey.
Mr. Chairman, this is a minor subdivision plat application for Buckaloo subdivision. The subject parcels are located along Blakely Way behind 31016, 31076, and 31082 Blakely Way. This subdivision application proposes to combine the existing 3 parcels into one resulting lot equaling approximately 2.019 acres. The resulting lot is proposed to be accessed via a 30-foot non-exclusive ingress, egress, and utility easement extending to Blakely Way, as shown on the plat here. All parcels under consideration are currently under ownership of the same property. Staff has reviewed all submitted information regarding this application and has found all required documentation to be accounted for and in compliance with all applicable ordinances and regulations. Therefore, staff recommends the Planning Commission approve agenda item 230202, application for minor subdivision plat approval for Buckaloo subdivision.
Okay, discussion? We have a public hearing on this, and Look like a couple of people have signed up. Ms. Sheila Ratcliffe, with your pro.
There you
Got
go.
it. I just would like to, I don't know the gentleman over here, but, the one that spoke in the plaid shirt. I'd just like to bring a couple of items to your attention that some of you probably were not in the positions that you were in with the city of Spanish Fort and may not be aware of. When I built, got our permit back in, I think it was 2009, I did take the time, because I had previously worked for a builder in Maryland, so I had a little knowledge. I don't know everything, but I had a little knowledge and a little guidance prior to coming back here. I consulted with the Corps of Engineers, and they showed me, and I didn't have time to grab the map because I did want to share it with you, and it's probably been updated since then, but they did show me the wetland back in that area. That's a big concern of ours, the wetland. There are two creeks. One is Bogey, and I may be pronouncing that right, B-O-G-G-Y, Bogey Creek, and I do have a copy of that. So Bogey Creek actually crosses that 30-foot easement that is back there in the back. Now, when that easement was actually created, Mr. Watts, he just left. His grandfather, Virgil Watts, was the one that actually put that easement in. It was my understanding that the Long's house had burned down, and they could not put their home back in the same spot, so that's why he gave them that easement. I don't have a problem with the ingress, egress. The easement, the problem I have is water. And I invite any one of you to come to our house on a rainy day, and you will see this gentleman's property just flooding. I mean, it's a pond back there. So I'd like for some consideration to be taken to that easement that's back there. The easement is supposed to actually belong to the city of Spanish Fort. As far as it being maintained, it's supposed to be a city easement. It does not belong to the property owners back there. That's what I was told going way back. But please take into consideration, there are two, I think the other creek is Spanish Fort Creek, but there are a lot of creeks. And if you look at this paper, you can kind of see all the little creeks that's flowing into there. The other thing that happened to add to the complications, previous homeowner on the, would be on the south side of us, he had a drainage pipe put in. And water just, when it rains, it could be coming from the creek. I don't think it's all coming from rainwater because we don't have drains on Blakely Way that tie in. It's going up under, I think that creek is going up under Mr. Reynolds' house next door to us. But there's just a lot of water up there. Concern is the water, our foundation shifting, and not just, again, not me because we're on a higher ground, but that water is going back behind us. So I'm just asking that you please take that in consideration with actually that is a dedicated easement back there. The other concern is garbage. Again, you all may not have been in this area over the past, I don't know how many years, but Mr. Watts was the garbage man, and there is a lot of garbage back there. My husband and I both went through a major lawsuit in the state of Maryland, and it was because there was, and it's documented, you can pull it up, it's Calvert Ridge subdivision in Howard County, Maryland. Our neighbor, bless their heart, had a baby and had a little dog, and something happened with the dog, and next thing we knew, we had methane gas in our houses from a landfill, unauthorized landfill that had been there for who knows how many years. We actually managed to change the laws in the state of Maryland for developers because they had to do testing test pits to make sure it was nothing. And I did, believe it or not, I did, and I do have a copy of the engineer that came from Montgomery, Alabama. I had our ground tested before we built our home because of what had happened to us previously. But we lived for 2 or 3 years with methane alarms in our house waking us up, and it was not a lot of fun. And we went through a very big lawsuit because of that. So we are concerned about the garbage. This gentleman is my neighbor, and he said to me, you know, we just keep digging up trash, you know, so it's a lot of garbage back there. We don't have a soil conservation entity in this county that I'm told. I'm told there is a state conservation. Where we live, we happen to have a soil conservation entity that was local. So, and without me knowing before we built our house, I just happened to snap a picture, and the picture I snapped was a test pit that the developer even knew that the garbage was there. And it was all mediated. They came and took all the garbage out. But please take in consideration there is a lot of garbage on a lot of acreage behind us. And I would love to see it never touched, because God knows if it is touched, and if methane or old tires or something start, methane gas moves, and it is explosive. So we wouldn't want anything like that to happen. So I'm just asking that you please take those things into consideration. Any questions? Or can I provide you with anything?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Levy, Loa.
Yes, I'm Levi Loya. I live at 31186 Blakely Way. I have some short concerns and just overall questions about the easement and the property's land being placed there. The easement, I understand when I bought the house, it's a 30-foot easement that's quite extensive out into the forest around me, and as you move down the easement on the very long path going to the Long's property, there's also a very large oak, and from what I understand from some of the, I believe the codes that I read on it, is probably, I don't know, at least a 60 to 100-year-old oak that's going to pass right into that easement as well. It's kind of a concern. I mean, I am kind of a nature lover. I love all of that being there, and that I'm guessing will either have to be go around or torn down if I can provide some other way, since I do own the corner parcel at the notch of that L and the one to the east of it. I'd be much obliged to try and assist in that, if going around that tree or whatnot. Mr. Ratcliffe is correct. At the very bottom of my first parcel there, it does basically turn into a very large pond, and the creek starts pretty much right about there and continues through that area for pretty much a large valley. You can call and echo down the valley a bit. There is an extensive amount of trash. I go out at least once a week and pick up a garbage bag of trash from either parcel, basically. So it's just something to be concerned with and to notify the folks there. In addition, my concerns are, I have no issue with somebody turning their plot into a single piece, or needing to use that easement for that. My only concern, and maybe this will come later down the line with more information, I noticed that it is going to turn into a minor subdivision plat. What that exactly means for people going in and out of there, for utility trucks moving in and out of there. The only reason I ask these questions is I have a 2-year-old child and a smaller one, and as you can see, that easement abuts maybe 10 feet outside my door of the main entrance to my house, and so any questions, any answers to that, or at least clarification would be very well appreciated. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any additional discussion?
Mr. Chairman, as it relates to his last question, what's happening here today is not going to affect the easements or anything in any way. Whatever easements you still have, whatever issues are there, still there. The only thing that this is doing is taking, is it 3 lots or 2 lots? Taking 3 lots and turning it into 1. Other than that, it's just drawing lines in between those outside boundaries, that's it. So it's not affecting or changing anything else around the property.
Any discussion? If not, let's get a motion.
Just real quick, the discussion about the garbage back there, we don't really have any control over that. Would we ever?
If we knew there was an illegal dump or something going on, we would try to stop that, obviously, under our litter ordinance. I think you were saying that this was done some long time ago, right? I think it was, in answer to your question, I think that was done prior to the time the city was incorporated, it sounds like. Yeah, if something was happening now, certainly we would stop it. Baldwin County and ADM do have programs to do cleanups of certain issues. And those things can be reported and followed up with them potentially to address those things, but that's not something the city's ever been involved in.
Can I get a motion?
Make a motion, we approve agenda item 230202, application for minor subdivision plat.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Davis.
Yes.
Diamond.
Yes.
Vaughn.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Tucker.
Yes.
McMillan.
Okay. Public participation.
I'll take a quick second. I just wanted to answer a couple of your questions there. With the way it was, there could have been 3 houses back there. Now there can only be 1. So if that was one of your concerns about having less density, less traffic back there, less people trying to even get back there, that we only did something to help you there.
Announcement. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission will be held Monday, March 13, 2023. A work session will begin at 6 p.m. in the multipurpose room of the Spanish Fort Community Center, followed by the regular meeting at 6:30. The next formal work session of the Planning Commission will be held Monday, February 27, 2023 at 6 p.m. The submission deadline for the March 23rd regular meeting agenda is Tuesday, February 14 at 12 o'clock. That concludes our Planning Commission meeting for tonight.
Motion to adjourn.
So be